You're listening to the Support Report with Be Present, where we share real stories from young adults and how support changed their lives.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Report. We are Be Present. I'm your host, Justin Peters, and joined by always my co-host, Kiara Riga. Kiara, what's up? How you doing, man?
I'm pretty good. It's been a minute.
It has been a minute. I feel like we were on a pretty good cadence there of seeing each other and recording, and then took the fall off, which it sounds like both of us were fairly busy. You told me nothing much, just got married, but I feel like that's a pretty big nothing much.
Yeah, we finally had our wedding. It was beautiful, spectacular. We rented out like a marine research museum kind of place. And so they're right on the water. Our ceremony was like on a cliff on the ocean. Couldn't have asked for better weather. Saw otters and dolphins. And then at cocktail hour, we had like volunteer docents came to open the touch tanks so people could interact with the marine life.
Sick.
And then instead of dancing, we did board game night, and it was so much fun. Like almost everyone stayed the whole time, and it was just like a lot of like wholesome, awesome fun.
That's sick. Board games. That's like so unique. I love that you were like, let's nix the dancing and let's play some board games. I'm guessing you
Yeah.
guys love to play board games.
We love board games. And then, like a year before our wedding, I went to a different wedding. And it was the first one I'd been to since I got sick. And I couldn't dance for more than like two or three songs. I just got so tired. And so I was like, I'm not going to be left out on my wedding day. So we decided to do games night as a way to kind of like make it accessible to me, but not just have people like sitting around. And people seem to really love it. Like whenever I talk to people, they're like, "Yeah, I bought the game I was playing at the
Cool.
wedding and stuff." So yeah, it was good.
What a sick concept. Well, we do have a guest today, but before we get to that, I'd love to pick your brain about something. I was recently looking at Chelsea Gomez Instagram. It is, "Oh, you are so tough." And her pinned post is just kind of a call out for like finding your cancer bestie. And I guess people can comment on that post if they're in kind of the same geographical area or have the same diagnosis. I'm wondering, I think we've talked about it a little bit on the show, how important it is to have a friend or a cancer bestie that is kind of going through something similar. I know you've made some comments that it's a great that people are there to support you, your friends, but if they're not going through a diagnosis themselves, they might not understand all of the complexities, and maybe that's the gap that a cancer bestie fills.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we all know just how wonderful it is to like have someone in your life who truly understands what you're going through, right? Like that's why parents have their parent friends. You know, all sorts of things like that. You want to be able to relate to somebody. And my friends who have never had cancer can't really relate to what I'm going through, and I don't want them to, because if they relate, that means they've gone through something horrific and traumatic. And so having a good relationship with a person or people with cancer is so healing because you can go like, if I texted a friend what I was dealing with, they would, "Oh, why don't you try this, try this, try this?"
Yeah.
Or, like they won't know what to say. Versus your cancer friend can be like, "Oh yeah, I had that. It was the worst." Like my cancer bestie died this summer. I miss her every day, but we were able to talk and joke about things that people would be horrified to read our texts. But for us, it was just like what we were living, and it didn't have to be dark because we were both going through it. So, like, she landed in the ER. I knew she needed some like humor. And it was like January. And so I was like, "Lauren, this is one way to hit your out-of-pocket maximum, like just trying to lighten the mood and things that like nobody in your everyday life is gonna say because they're too afraid." So I think it's really, really important. I mean, like I said, obviously, like I lost my best friend. Like it can be really difficult in a lot of ways, but I would always rather have had that friendship with her for as long as I got than to not have it at all. Like what I learned from her and who I became because of our friendship is something I would never get rid of.
Yeah, and there's definitely the relatableness, but also just like the person to be like, What the fuck? Like I know Chelsea does like
Yes.
the what the fuck Wednesdays and like the salty Saturdays or Sundays maybe.
Yes.
And like reading some of those, I mean, some of them are just like very unaware people. But you know, something just like, hey, why don't you move? And someone not understanding that your medical support system, all of your doctors are in that same place for the last 5 years, and it's not as simply as like moving and finding new doctors. That's something that somebody that hasn't gone through a diagnosis might not understand is a pretty big challenge. So it's, I think, kind of cool to also just have someone there to like screenshot or send some things to and just be like, you're not going to believe what this person said or what I did today or what the doctor told me. So yeah, that's cool. Any advice on where to find a cancer bestie? Of course, Chelsea's pinned post is out there. You can go scroll through the comments and post yourself. But do the hospitals facilitate this or any other organizations that might help? Uh-oh.
I've had my local hospital try and facilitate. It is tough when you're young, and I do recommend, like, for young people finding another young person because it is just a completely different experience. There are a few nonprofits I can plug. One is called Resilient Ship. They make friendship matches with for women with cancer, not necessarily female cancers, necessarily like not just breast and gynecologic, but I met someone with appendix cancer through them. There's also Immerman's Angels will match you with like a mentor kind of, and I think that can actually be a really great way to get your feet wet because there isn't an expectation of you supporting them. It's one way.
Mm,
And so if you're worried about the darkness of being in the cancer community but want that relationship, that's a really great place to go. They also do caregiver matches, and that's been great for my husband. And then the last one, how I met my cancer bestie was through an organization called ABCD, which stands for After Breast Cancer Diagnosis. They also do peer matches and caregiver matches with other caregivers. And it's very much a mentorship program. Lauren and I were kind of a an anomaly there. Most people don't form like a very close relationship that becomes a friendship. I think within a couple of weeks, she told them like, "Yeah, no, Kiara is not my mentee. We're just friends." So, um, but yeah, I think mentorship is like a really good way to get into it. I've heard the Young Survival Coalition, I believe, has things like that. Finding support groups, whether virtual or in person, is a good way to find people as well. I mean, there's so many different avenues, and also like if people are sharing their experience on Instagram, follow, like they are open to talking about it, right?
mm.
So follow the hashtags, find the hashtag for what you're looking for. If it's young cancer, if it's metastatic cancer, whatever, follow those hashtags. And if you find someone whose posts are really resonating, just DM them. Like I've had tons of people DM me and be like, hey, I feel really alone. And I really resonated with your post. And like we still, exchange messages every once in a while. And I'm always happy for people to come to me. And you can absolutely do that without being vulnerable yourself on your own page. I think those of us who are sharing publicly don't expect the same in return. We just want to be there. So
Totally fair. Um, Speaking of someone that's humorous, today's guest, I'm excited to jump into this conversation. You mind doing a quick intro and bringing Lauren into the conversation?
absolutely. I am super excited. So today we have Lauren Versteeg joining us. She was diagnosed with stage 3 rectal cancer in October 2023 at the age of 26. She is passionate about spreading the word about colorectal cancer screening, especially in young adults. Lauren, we're so excited to have you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
And just to clear it up, when I talk about Lauren, my cancer bestie, this is a different Lauren, though just as hilarious. And I'm very excited for this combo.
Yeah, I hope I can do justice to the name.
I'm sure you will. Do you want to start off by telling us just kind of how you got diagnosed, what that process looked like, any roadblocks you hit?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, always talking about my cancer diagnosis, it's not, I think, like a lot of cancer diagnoses, it's not a glamorous process, especially with rectal cancer. It's to throw our first joke in, it's a pretty crappy process. That's the only one I'll do like that today. Um, But essentially, yeah, I had always kind of been the friend with like the weak stomach. Like anytime we would go on like road trips, I would have stomach issues. Like if I ate something weird, I would have stomach issues. And then finally, it started to get like pretty bad, kind of towards like the tail end of like the pandemic and things being really shut down. And then I was actually out to dinner with a friend one night. I live in New York City, so we were out to dinner on the streets of New York because you couldn't dine inside still. And I was having some stomach problems, and she was like, maybe you should like go see somebody about that. And so that was just kind of the final catalyst that I needed. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to make an appointment. And the next day I got in to see my doctor, who referred me to a gastroenterologist. And she was like, just go see this other doctor, get these things looked at, just to be safe. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll go get it looked at. Then it was the summer, and I was 26 years old, having fun, living it up in the summer. I forgot to go to the doctor. And then finally, eventually, I actually went to see the gastroenterologist, and she started to sort of just like go through things that she wanted to like rule out, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, any sort of, bacterial infection, whatever it may be. And she eventually, luckily, decided, to do a colonoscopy, which going into it, I was like, oh, this will be no problem. Like my parents were like, did one of us need to come down to like take you? And I was like, I'll get a friend to take me. Thankfully, my mom ended up not accepting that answer, and her and my dad just decided that she would come down and, take care of me for the colonoscopy. And I went in, I had a great nap. I came out, and it was definitely, there was a mood shift in the room. It's weird to think of when the doctor came in and she told me, they called my mom down, and then she told us they found what she thought looked like a malignant tumor in my rectum. So I think part of the, in the darkest way possible, a good thing to come out of this diagnosis was like I was actually still under pretty heavy sedation when I was diagnosed. So I don't think I was able to have like the full gauntlet of emotions maybe that people typically have when they first hear that they have cancer. But yeah, kind of came to the next few days after that were just full of endless doctor's appointments. I mean, thankfully, I was treated through NYU here in New York, and they moved so fast to get me in with a surgeon, an oncologist, the radiation oncologist. Like they had me, I was getting scans the next day. I was like, I had never felt more like a VIP. But yeah, that was kind of the journey to my diagnosis.
That's,
And
you said the mood shifted in the room, and it immediately reminded me of my own experience. I don't think we've spoken about this before, but on the podcast, there's nothing more awkward than that moment or couple of minutes when the doctor knows and you don't yet. And they are trying to make it like I remember, so I am like part of a professional group with Adobe for my job, and I was wearing some shoes that had an Adobe logo on them because Adobe had sent them to me. And the doctor came in, and I'm like laying on the table with my shirt off, and I'm like waiting for him to talk to me, and he's commenting on my shoes. Like I will never forget him like commenting on my shoes. That's the last thing the last normal comment I had, before everything was like cancer. And I like that is such an interesting, like I don't think anyone's ever mentioned it before, but what was it like for you? I guess under heavy sedation, maybe a little different, but
Yeah, I came to kind of out of, you're in like you're not totally out cold. You're like, yeah, heavily sedated. So you're in kind of this twilight, I think is what they usually call it, this twilight sleep. And I sort of like started making jokes, shockingly, But I was talking, excuse me, I was talking to the nurse in the room, and I was like, "Oh, you guys woke me up from my nap. It was so nice." And I remember she told me, she was like, "You've been awake for like 10 minutes," and I was like, "Oh, what?" And I was like, "Okay, so that's terrifying." But then, yeah, she was just like, the nurse or the doctor will be right in. We'll bring your mom down, and I think I probably asked the nurse. I was like, "Oh, how did it go? Like, was it good?" And I think she was just kind of like, "Yeah, the doctor will be right in to talk to you." And yeah, the doctor came in, and she was just pretty matter of fact about it, which I think is kind of what you have to be working in that, or having to do that thing in your career. Um, and yeah, she just came in and said, this is what we found. We've already, like I said, been in contact with a surgeon who we work closely with, who's going to see you tomorrow. And she was just kind of like, XYZ, like, this is what's happening. And yeah, I think I was just kind of like, wait, what?
Mm.
Like, there was like, cancer wasn't even remotely on my radar going into this. I was like, oh, they're probably gonna like find Crohn's or something, which would be horrible also. But I almost mentally was like more ready for that diagnosis than cancer. And then, thankfully my mom was there and kind of had the wherewithal to, ask questions, which we can kind of get into. But I think a huge part of this is having somebody with you through the whole cancer journey that isn't like the one being treated, that like knows the questions to ask and like can kind of be that third party. So she just kind of like, I think after that, I kind of just like blacked out, and she kind of just took the reins. And then we left, and we got in a cab and came back up to my apartment, and I fell back asleep, took another nap. And then that was kind of that day.
That's crazy. What happened after that? I think at some point in time you went through a month of radiation, correct?
Yeah, yeah. So my treatment started, it was just about a year ago today. Or a year ago right now, that I was doing radiation. It was like December, early January. I did 30 days of radiation. So that one, I like didn't really know much about radiation at all, kind of going into cancer treatment. So, I feel like I had known kind of what chemo in the grand scheme of things was kind of like. Radiation was wild. They were like, oh yeah, it's literally, they're like, we're gonna like shoot laser beams at the tumor and like blast it. So I would always say that I was going to get my butt blasted, which was always funny. But yeah, it was like every morning I would wake up, I would, I would splurge. I would usually take an Uber down to the doctor's office, which like, if there's a time to splurge on an Uber, it's when you're going to get your butt blasted. And yeah, you would go and lay down on this table, and it's crazy. This like huge machine just rotates around you and like so precisely aims these radioactive beams at your tumor to shrink it. So I did that for about 30 days. It was about a month and a half because there's the holidays. I got the day off for Christmas and New Year, so that was lovely. Um, but yeah, went and did that for 30 days. Then I did 8 rounds of chemo, uh, which took about 4 months. So it was like every other week. And then the last piece was just go in, and I had a rectal resection surgery to kind of clean out what there was like, they said there were like a few cancer cells left, that they saw that they were able to take out. But yeah, that was kind of the last step.
Yeah,
That's
between
crazy. Yeah, your experience with radiation, I feel like I had the same one. I had to have it I had one little spot show up on my bones. And so instead of changing my treatment to a new one, it was one spot, we'll just radiate it. And everyone talks about it being the easiest part of treatment, but you walk in the room, I don't know about you, but in my clinic, there was a hole in the ceiling where the laser goes. like
Oh, I
you
don't.
could see where
I
like
was
the
face down, so
okay, so I was laying on my back and I look up and directly above me there's a big old hole in the ceiling from what the radiation was doing to the ceiling and I was like that's going in my body. Like
Mm.
yeah,
it's so wild. But yeah, I'm glad you're through all of it now and you seem to be doing so, so well. I would love to talk. You mentioned that like having someone there was really important. Also, like your friend who told you to go to the doctor was a really important part of your story. I would love to hear the role that kind of the people in your life played during your cancer treatment.
yeah, yeah. I think like this is the piece that always kind of gets me. I don't really get emotional like talking about my cancer and the treatment. It's the people that I've both physically and metaphorically had by my side through this whole journey that always kind of like tugs at my heartstrings a little bit because it's maybe cliche, but I really wouldn't have gotten through it without my whole like insanely large support team. So yeah, I mean, early on, you were talking about cancer besties, and yeah, I had kind of a impromptu cancer mentor, and a woman that I work with actually the year before had gone through treatment for breast cancer. And I worked for a pretty small company. So, you hear things. So like as people I worked with started to get wind of my diagnosis and what I was going through, um, you know, she really let me reach out to her. Like I don't think she wanted to bombard me or be like, "Hey, I heard you have cancer," which I think was huge. Um, because in those early days, you don't know what to say, like to talk about it. You're like, I don't even know what's happening inside of me right now. Like everything is weird. But she told me, I finally reached out to her and we were talking, and she gave me, two really great pieces of it. She gave me a lot of great advice, but two really good pieces that I still can remember all the time. One was no matter what, get 8 hours of sleep, which I still do to this day. I'm a very good sleeper and I prioritize my sleep. So this is my pitch to everybody to get your 8 hours. But number two was don't go to any doctor's appointments alone. And that one, I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, what is that? You want somebody there to like, hold your hand or whatever. And she was like, no, you need somebody who's not as, obviously everybody that was with me was like emotionally involved in this process, but you need somebody who's not there being the receiver of all of this information about themselves, and somebody who can come in and like literally take notes in a notebook, ask random questions that maybe you either didn't think of or had thought of earlier and didn't remember them, whatever it may be. So, yeah, in that first kind of chunk of time after I was diagnosed, my parents came down and we went to the store. We bought a notebook, and that was the notebook I would take to every doctor's appointment, and whoever I was with would take notes. And they would ask questions, and we would kind of do like in the waiting room, we would go through like any questions I had at that point, because as soon as you're in the room and you're getting any information, like any question you had, at least for me personally, would go like out the window. I was like, I would smile and nod. I'd be like, okay, yeah, totally. And so like, there's a lot of big life altering decisions that you're making in those early days. So I was like, I just need, yeah, somebody there to like write down every single thing that happens. And that on top of just, being the person to hold your hand if you need it or give you a hug after the appointment because you are making life altering decisions regularly. So I think at the core, it's just if you can, having somebody else there with you is like huge. I think it's a game changer because yeah, I just wouldn't remember any of the information I had to take in through the whole process. And then, when I was going through chemo, I was lucky enough to have family and friends, some combination, come with me to every chemo appointment, which, um, I think anybody who's gone through chemo can attest to. Like, chemo appointments are long and they're boring and they suck. So anything you can do to like make it a little bit better goes a long way. So my parents, I could have two visitors at a time. So either my parents would come down or my sister, who lives in Washington, D.C., would come up and hang out with me for a few days during the actual day that I was like in the chair. And then my chemo, I actually had a pump that would go in a fanny pack that I had to wear for 2 days that would continue to pump in me so that I'd hang out. Um, I also had some friends that were able to come with me. That friend that I originally I was at dinner with, that suggested I go see somebody for my stomach aches. She was able to come with me. And then also some other great friends that I've made through work were also able to come with me. And we would just sit there and yap and watch movies and eat candy usually. So yeah, I mean, just the whole kind of, and those are the people that were right physically by my side, but there were so many more people that, were either sending me text messages way too often for, people, but they all meant the world to me, or sending me handwritten notes, or, care packages, whatever it may be, or even just it would like, my parents like updates on Facebook or whatever it may be. I genuinely, and I still am like blown away by the number of people that reached out to me and like were thinking of me during this time. People I knew from high school, which it wasn't that long ago, but people I knew from high school that I hadn't spoken to or honestly really thought about in years, where when I posted the video of me like ringing the chemo bell, they were responding to that Instagram story being like, hell yeah, I knew you could do it. Like, I've been cheering for you from the sidelines. And like that just, I'm a big believer in energies. So I think even if they weren't kind of reaching out to me all the time, I could feel the energy of like, there've been so many people that have even just sort of thought, cared, prayed, whatever, it may be. And it just, it truly feels like a big warm hug all the time.
Yeah, I love this.
Absolutely. I think so. You threw out a lot there, and I think for our supporters listening, these are all fantastic things to think about. I think one that we haven't really had anyone talk about is just like that need to have someone with you at an appointment. And I think that's like it's so smart. It's something I've been doing because I'm the exact same. Like, I'll write questions in my phone, and then my doctor asks if there's any questions. I'm like, no, even though I've got them written down. Like, I don't know what comes over me. It's a common thing, right? And
Yeah.
so, like, that is such a good, our closest friends and stuff, like, it's so hard for them to watch and, oh, I don't know what I can do to help. Offer to be a note taker. Like, obviously, know your place, right? Like, if you haven't spoken to them since high school, that's probably a little invasive, right? But if that's a very close friend of yours, that is such like a meaningful thing that costs you no money and is super, super helpful way to support someone. So I think that's incredible. You also spoke about care packages, and I heard you had a very funny one from work. Do you want to share about it?
Yeah. Yeah. So like I've kind of touched on, so I work in advertising, and um, the company I work with, were a very close knit, like way too closely knit group of people that are all pretty similar, and at least in terms of like humor. So yeah, my good friend Sydney, she organized like a care package, and it had Uber gift cards so I could get to radiation. It had, blankets, journals, all the typical stuff. but also in it were, some things to really lighten the mood. Um, and so there, I don't know where I put it. I usually have it right around my desk, but one friend sent me a book of 101 butt jokes, and they wrote on the inside cover, it said for ages like 4 and up. And she said, or people recently diagnosed with rectal cancer. So, it was like just, yeah, keeping things light in such a heavy time. It's definitely, there's a time and a place and a type of person, I think, that can keep things light. And there's, a lot of times where things get really heavy with cancer, and treatment and all of that. But if you can find, I think, the humor in some of these things, not the humor in the cancer itself, but yeah, the humor in I have to go to an appointment every single day where I take off my pants and I lay face down on a table while a laser is shooting me. Like that's just funny. At its core, that's just like something you can laugh about. So I think being able to kind of find those funny situations, are key to just getting through this and keeping some of your sanity intact.
Yeah, I'm guessing
Absolutely.
the cancer treatment took a big toll on you, and I like these like creative ways to like I don't know, stay engaged is probably the wrong word, but just like kind of count down and continue to give yourself a little bit of resilience in it. And my favorite one that you mentioned was when you did the 30 days of radiation. You did a paper chain link with 30 of them, and then after every single one, you would cut one off, so you'd be seeing the chain get smaller and smaller. But I also really like this other thing that you did called Stew. Can you tell me who Stew is and kind of how that came about?
Yeah. Stu, we love him, but we really hate him. So Stu, I don't know, kind of early days after I was diagnosed, like I said, I spent a lot of time with my parents, going to doctor's appointments, hanging out. And, it just sort of started to come about where I was like calling my tumor Stu. And then we started saying, oh, Stu is short for stupid tumor. And so, my mom, who's an amazing creative director and graphic designer, was able to actually create a little drawing of Stu. And he just looks like this angry little blob. Like I was
I'm
able to
imagining
see
like the Mucinex guy.
Yeah, that's funny.
exactly. I recently, after officially beating Stu, I did get him tattooed
Oh,
here
cool.
on my arm. So
Oh, I
yeah,
love that.
he kind of looks just like the Mucinex guy. Very same idea. And yeah, we were able to make these t-shirts. And they said on the front, they said, F you, Stu. And then on the back, it said, send Stu packing. And we were able to use that to raise money for the Colorectal Cancer Alliance. We like made the t-shirts, had them printed, and yeah, a bunch of people bought them, and so we had a lot of fun with it. I mean, that was the first time where I really felt like the love of so many people, because I was like, these people are buying a ridiculous t-shirt with a little blob on it, and it says F you on it, and they're doing it for me. So, we did that. And he was just kind of like always, yeah, the little character I would take along with me to all my appointments and be like, we're gonna obliterate Stu. He's gonna be gone forever. And actually, so after my surgeries, that I was deemed, no evidence of disease in my body. So knock on wood, that holds true for forever. But coming out of that, I decided I wanted to have a big old party to celebrate, and to really, thank all of these people who have been by my side for this whole journey. So I actually had two. I had one down here in New York City and one back in my hometown where I'm from, so we could kind of cover my friends here, and then my friends and family back home. But we called it the stooneral. So I had my mom draw up a whole new drawing of, I don't have this one tattooed on me or I would show you, but a drawing of Stu like laying in a coffin. And so, yeah, it was like a fun, it might be considered a way to disassociate with, the whole journey, but, it was a fun way to kind of say, like, put a name to this thing and say, like, we're going to just obliterate him.
Yeah.
I love that. And I feel like in the beginning I named my tumor Fred. I now have so many that it's just like, I can't name them all. But I feel like having it personified almost took away some of the power.
Mm.
Yeah.
Like I'll let you talk about it as well, but for me it was very much like cancer is this big thing and you can't control, but like if it's another person, like yeah, people are flawed the same way I am, and it made it easier somehow.
Yeah. And I think that was like, I think like subconsciously, probably, that was like something I had been through before. I had like, I've had a history of like anxiety and things like that. And when I first got into like speaking with a therapist, she said, you should name your anxiety. Like, it's almost right, personify it. So you kind of take away some of its power because you're like, oh, you know, right. Oh, Fred's here visiting again. You know, we'll hang out and then he'll be on his merry way. Like, Stu was here. He was, we took care of him. We killed him, and now he's gone.
Lauren, as we're wrapping up this conversation, how has adjustment to kind of life post-treatment been? Easy, hard? Can you give us kind of the good, bad, and the ugly?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of that's a bigger mountain than I was expecting. I think as most people who are probably in cancer treatment can attest to, it's like your goal is to get through this and to, move on with your life. But when you do get through it and you start to move on with your life, you're kind of like, wait, what? Like, one, you're trying to process what in the hell just happened. I'm still working through it. I'm like, it's it's been now just over a year since I was diagnosed. So I'm like, what in the world just happened over this past year? Like, it feels like I was living a life. It stopped. I did all this, and now I'm like just all of a sudden thrown back into like regular where I was before, which is a strange feeling because I'm very different in a lot of ways than I was before. Um, but I've found for me personally, what's worked is identifying a new like singular goal, because I think that was a big thing that I was missing was, coming out of treatment. I was like, let's cut the links off this paper chain. We're gonna get through the next thing. And I had, a checklist of I need to do this, this, and this. And then, I'll get back to my life. And then I kind of got back to my life and I was like, whoa, this is overload of like, there's so many things I could do. There's so many things I want to do. There's so many things that I don't want to do anymore. And so, I mean, that's manifested in, I think, a few different like goals for myself of like, the cliche of like, I'm going to run a marathon. So I'm currently training for a half marathon, which is
Sick.
insane because I truly like have never been a runner, but I'm like, okay, we're going to do this. But I think it just takes time to figure out what you want to focus your energy on next, because you do have like this surplus of energy now. Like, I feel so much stronger than I did 6 months ago, going through 8 rounds of chemo. At the end of that, I was exhausted. I was hitting well over my 8 hours of sleep every night. But now I'm like, I have all this energy. What can I do? And I think it's just finding ways to kind of channel that into, whatever you might be passionate about. And so for some people, it might be something that they love to do before they were diagnosed. For some people, maybe there's a new thing you're really into, like deciding that you're going to go run 13 miles for whatever reason. But I think for me, it was like finding a solid goal that I could like work towards and put all of that extra energy towards has been huge. But yeah, I think coming back into normal life, quote unquote, it was the mental game. That's when the mental game for me really started of, you're getting back to work. Everybody's like, oh great, you're back. You've been gone for 4 months. Like, and it's like, oh wait, wow, yeah, I'm back in it now. Which I was lucky enough to be able to take the time to, you know, not work during my 4 months of chemo. But then to come back, everybody's like, okay, here's this, and this. Like, we're so happy you're back. And I was like, whoa, like, not only have I not been working for 4 months, but I'm still dealing with chemo brain, which, is a very real thing I've learned is, it's pretty intense. Like, you're dealing with that. I'm dealing with, my body is still just recovering from literally being beaten to a pulp by radiation and chemo over the last 6 months. And then with surgery, the same thing. It took me longer than I would have expected to kind of feel 100% physically and mentally again. But, I think for the patients out there and for the caregivers, let it take its time. It will run its course, and eventually you'll find something to put that energy towards. And it again, kind of cliche, but it will get better. You just have to give it time because there is still like a lot of stuff going on in your brain, in your body when you come right out of treatment. You have to kind of let it finish running its course, and then, things will get a little clearer and easier for you every day.
I love that, Lauren. You have been such a gem to talk to. I think I've resonated with just about everything that you've said. We have one question that we love to ask all of our guests. You got into it a little bit. Sorry, I jumped the gun earlier, but what does great support look like to you?
Yeah, right. I think it looks like just being there for the patient that you're, you know, wanting to support, whether that be physically, going to appointments with people, I think is huge. Or just even through text, if it's checking in on a random Wednesday, when maybe that they're not, for me, for example, I was doing chemo every other week. Maybe if, checking in on somebody like that in their off week from chemo, because, during that chemo week that they've got a lot of eyes on them, check in on that off week, because again, I think that's when that mental battle is a little bit harder in a lot of ways than, maybe when they're actively going through that round of treatment.
Absolutely agree.
Lauren, I appreciate you joining us today. If people want to reach out, connect any way that they can, or do you want to stay anonymous and and pass them on to the next person?
No, I am clearly an open book. So you can find me on pretty much any social media. It's at Lauren Verse, VERS. You can reach out. Don't be intimidated that I barely post on Instagram. I promise I am active on there a lot. And yeah, I'm always happy to chat or be someone's cancer bestie or cancer mentor. Or if you just have any questions about whatever it may be, I'm happy to answer.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Lauren. Kiara, any final words, or we get to sign off here?
No, I think we can sign off. Thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of the Support Report, and we will catch you on the next one.